In this instructional video, we will go over solving absolute value equations. Essential question: how can you solve an absolute value equation? The objective is to formulate and solve absolute value equations. Before we begin, let's go over some good techniques and expectations in order to be successful. So, first of all, make sure that you're watching the video and you're listening. Remember that you have the freedom to pause, rewind, fast forward at any time. The key thing here is to listen, all right? Now, second, make sure that on your paper you write your name, date, and class period in the top right corner. Make sure it's legible. I am not going to stamp your homework if I don't see your name written on it. Make sure that the notes that you're taking are Cornell notes. Okay, I have set it up that way so that it will be a little easier for you to see. Number 4, you will definitely find you try problems at the end. I expect those problems attempted or finished if you can. If you do not understand, I need a sentence of your point of confusion. Let me know what's wrong. Let me know what you need help on. Now, number 5, you need to write a summary. 15 points taken off if you do not write your summary. And last, you need to add at least 2 questions on this side of your notes. So make sure that you have that done. Let's go ahead and begin with some vocabulary. So absolute value, this should be a review from junior high. The absolute value of a number is how far a number is from 0. So for example, if we're trying to find the absolute value of 3, we know that the answer is 3 because obviously 3 is 3 units away from 0, right? So now if we were trying to find the absolute value of -3, well, -3 is also 3 units away from 0, so the answer is 3. Now, the absolute value equations are equations that contain absolute value expressions. So now we're going to be dealing with variables. So for example, the absolute value of x equals 3. This is an absolute value equation. Okay, so our goal is going to be for us to find the value of x, okay? So what number could we put in here that will give us the number 3? If you look at this number line, we have 2 options. X could either equal +3, right? Or it could also equal -3. Okay, so this is what we're basically going to be doing. Now, the last vocabulary word is going to be extraneous solutions. It's an apparent solution that must be rejected because it doesn't satisfy the original equation. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be taking our answers and plugging them in and see if they work. All right, let's go ahead and begin with the first set of examples. So in this section, we're going to look at solving absolute value equations. So our goal is to find what x is. So we have the absolute value of 3x plus 4 equals 10. In order to begin, you need to remember that all of this could be either +10 or it could be -10, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to take the 3x plus 4 and we're going to set it equal to the 10 and then also set it equal to -10. And we should be able to solve this time, right? So don't forget about inverse operations. So we're going to take away 4 on both sides. So we get 3x equals 6. And now we can divide both sides by 3. So x equals 2. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So by subtracting 4 on both sides and then dividing by 3, we get, this cancels out, x equals -14/3. Now, don't forget that we need to check our answers. We need to make sure that when we plug in the 2 that everything works out. So on this side, I'm going to go ahead and check my solutions. I'm going to check 2 first. So we have the absolute value of 3 times 2 plus 4. So we know that 3 times 2 is 6 plus 4 is 10. The absolute value of 10 is 10. So that means that that one is good to go. Let's check the second one. Okay, so we have, now we're dealing with a fraction, but if you can tell, we have a whole number and then we have the same denominator. So that means that this cancels out. So we have the absolute value of negative 14 plus 4 equals 10. So that gives us negative 10 equals 10. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. So that means that both of my answers work. So these are the solutions. Let's take a look at B. So the absolute value of 3x plus 1 equals negative 5. So on this problem, I would actually like you to work on it. I want you to think about the negative 5, okay? So go ahead and just press pause. Try to do it on your own. Then press play so that you can see the answer. Okay, so some of you might have started doing this. Okay, so since it's the absolute value, it's going to be 5 and negative 5. But guess what? We will not be able to do this step because an absolute value cannot equal a negative number, right? Because remember that the absolute value is like distance. It's how far this is from 0. It cannot be negative 5 units away, all right? So then we would say that this is considered a no solution. Okay, let's go on. Okay, second section, solving multi-step absolute value equations, right? Now the absolute value is not by itself. We have other coefficients and we have constants, okay? So this is not very complicated. So think about how you would solve for variables. You want to leave the variable by itself, right? So in order for us to begin finding W, we need to isolate the absolute value. So this needs to stay by itself first, okay? So pretend this is X, what would you do? I am sure that you guys would start with a constant, right? By adding it on both sides. Now we can bring everything else down. So we have 3 times the absolute value of 4W minus 1, and that equals 15. Now again, please remember that when you have a number in front of parentheses or absolute value, it means multiplication, right? So then the inverse of that would be to divide by 3. Okay, so we're going to divide everything by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So then that means that this cancels out. So we're left with the absolute value of 4W minus 1 equals 5. Now we can go ahead and split it up into the positive 5 and the negative 5. And then we would be ready to solve. So add 1 on both sides. So we're left with 4W equals 6. And then divide both sides by 4. So over here, W equals 6 over 4. If we simplify this fraction, it becomes 3 over 2. Okay? Now let's do the same thing over here. So plus 1 on both sides, opposite sides, we subtract and keep the sign of the largest number. So 4W equals negative 4. Divide by 4 on both sides. And we get W equals negative 1. Don't forget that we have to check our solutions, and I'm going to do it on the side. The first one is W equals 3 over 2. Okay, so we have 3, and then the absolute value of 4 times 3 over 2. So don't forget that this is the same thing as 4 over 1. So let's go ahead and multiply across. So it's 4 times 3 is 12. 1 times 2 is 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay, so 6 minus 1 is 5. Now the absolute value of 5 is 5. So let's go ahead and write 3 times 5 minus 5 equals 10. So we get 15 minus 5 equals 10. We get 10 equals 10. So that means that this one is right. So now let's go ahead and check the second one, negative 1. So this one is a little simpler. 4 times 1 is 4. Take away 1, we get 3. Now the absolute value of 3 is positive 3. So now we can multiply 3 times 3 minus subtract 5 equals 10. So we get 9 minus 5 equals 10. And now we have 4 equals 10. This is not true. So now we can go back to our vocabulary. That means that this right here is an extraneous solution. It didn't work out, right? So then that means that the only one that is part of the solution is W equals 3 over 2, not negative 1. And you know what? I caught a mistake just now. So it should have been negative 1 here. So let's go ahead and fix it. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Take away 1, we should have negative 5. There it goes. So then this becomes positive 5 and this becomes 15. So let's see. Now it actually works. It's not an extraneous solution, all right? So we'll make mistakes. So just make sure that you're careful with your work. So this is actually 10 equals 10. So both are answers, okay? All right, guys, I want you to write this down. We're going to do this in class. Okay, so this is the last section. Now we're going to be checking for extraneous solutions, and we're going to solve the absolute values, okay? So this time we have absolute values on both sides of the equal sign. We have the absolute value of 2x plus 5 equals the absolute value of 3x plus 4. Okay, so this is going to work the same way, all right? So we're going to go ahead and take this, and we're going to go ahead and split it into 2, okay? So we're going to begin with 2x plus 5 equals, okay? This expression is going to equal the positive of this expression over here. So 3x plus 4. Now, for the second one, because it could be positive or negative, we're still going to write 2x plus 5. But it could be equal to the negative of the second expression, 3x plus 4. Now we could use some algebra 1 to find the x value. So minus 3x on both sides. So we're going to get negative x plus 5 equals 4. Continue doing inverse operations. Last, we can divide both sides by negative 1, so x equals 1. Now let's go ahead and work with the second section. Don't forget that this is an understood negative 1, so we're going to end up distributing. Once we distribute, we can do inverse operations. I like my variables on the left. Okay, so we end up with x equals negative 9 divided by 5. Okay, so now the last thing to do is to check your solutions. Alright, so this becomes the absolute value of 7. This right here is the absolute value of 7. Okay, since both sides are the same, we can conclude that it's not extraneous. Okay, so now let's check the second one. Alright, so let's continue. Okay, so don't forget that we multiply across. This is the same thing as 2 over 1 and 3 over 1. So now we can go ahead and add the fractions together. If you have problems with fractions, make sure that you come in for tutoring, please. On the other side, we get the absolute value of... Now, since we're taking the absolute value of 7 over 5 and negative 7 over 5, this is basically 7 over 5 equals 7 over 5. So that means that this works, so we don't actually have any extraneous solution. So both of these work. Okay, guys, so now here are the U-track problems. Okay, so again, I expect an attempt on these problems. If you don't understand, write your point of confusion. So I want you to find the solutions to these three absolute value equations, and then make sure that you check for extraneous solutions. Okay. Now don't forget about this summary. It would help out if you answer the essential question and then write about the process of how to solve absolute value equations. Now you can also talk about the extraneous solutions. All right. So if you have any questions, send me a message through Canvas. See you in class.